Well, it's long been said that in polite company you shouldn't discuss politics, sex, or religion. These are arenas where many people have strongly held opinions and where an offhand comment can escalate way too quickly into an enraged screaming match. So it shouldn't be a surprise that when the government's position on the rights of LGBT students at religious schools was queried recently, it didn't take long for things to get heated. Well, that's just one of the hot topics we're looking at today.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Well, it's an absolute privilege to have in the studio today Roy Williams, author, political commentator, and now working at the University of Sydney. What are you doing there exactly, Roy?
I'm lecturing and tutoring in a couple of legal subjects, evidence and civil and criminal procedure, to be precise.
So law is your professional background, right?
That's right. So I practiced for 20 years in Sydney, one of the big commercial firms, and then took some time out to recuperate and write some books. But I've gone back into the law, but as a teacher this time, which is a very enjoyable and rewarding change of pace.
Now, thank you so much, Roy, for the article you wrote for us in Signs of the Times this month, December, focusing on the issue of the school chaplaincy program, which, of course, over recent years has been quite contested and quite a hot topic. And you summarise some of those arguments in your article, which is great. Thanks for that.
Pleasure.
So how far back should we go in terms of understanding this debate and where it's come from and where it is now? I mean, has it been a long-standing thing to have chaplains in schools?
No. The program, as we now know it, was instituted in 2006, the tail end of the Howard government, and it was controversial from the start. And the argument I make in the piece is that really both sides of this argument, both the radical secularists who don't want a bar of the program and constantly arguing for it to be scrapped, have got it wrong. But even the Christian apologists for the program tend to exaggerate its importance in the scheme of things, in the scheme of fighting the good fight. I mean, let me make it absolutely clear up front. I think the National School Chaplaincy Program is terrific. I think the people involved, or those I know, do great work. But it's frankly not the main game when it comes to the culture wars about religion, if you want to put it that way. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, let me explain why. The chaplains, so-called, are not really chaplains at all in the conventional religious meaning of the term. And this point has been made in the High Court by Justice Hayden in one of the challenges to the program. The people who are employed, the wonderful men and women who do the job, are simply not allowed to proselytise. That's a condition of the job, that they provide pastoral care.
Or even really to talk about religion that much, you point out in your article.
That's right. They can only talk about matters spiritual, that's the word used, if asked to do so by a student or a teacher or someone in the school community. And even then, conversation has to be conducted on the terms of the person the chaplain is speaking to. They've got to accept the worldview, the religious worldview of the person they're trying to help.
Right.
Sure, if they're asked, they can say what their own belief is, but my understanding from the chaplains I've spoken to is that they're simply not allowed to argue you should believe this, as it were.
Right. It's not a place to have a religious discussion about why one tradition is perhaps superior to another, or to convince or persuade or have a conversation along those lines.
That would only happen on, I think, very rare occasions where you got a student who was an unusual person for a teenager who wanted a genuinely open, no-holds-barred discussion about faith.
So I guess the point you're making is that when you think of a chaplain, you might think of a chaplain in a church school sort of setting where they are pretty much the campus pastor.
Correct.
Correct.
But a chaplain under the, as you said, the 2006 initiated public school scheme is quite a different thing. Basically, they're a welfare worker, they're a counsellor.
They don't even like the word counsellor being used because they're really a first port of call for a person with a problem. Now, counselling is actually a term of art.
Sure.
That
it's a specialised thing, but let's say welfare worker more broadly.
Yeah, indeed. A friend really, to a shoulder to cry on, or someone to run a problem past and perhaps be referred on to someone with specialist expertise in a particular area. Now, all of the surveys show that in terms of fulfilling that role, the chaplains do a great job.
Okay.
Huge majorities of parents surveyed, school principals surveyed, students surveyed, say that they greatly value the program and want to see it continued. If anything, the complaint of principals was that the chaplains can't do more rather than less.
But nevertheless, you point out in your article also that a vast majority of these people who hold these chaplain roles, as hogtied as they are in trying to carry out the spiritual aspect of that role, still most of them are adherents to a particular religion, and that's mostly Christianity. In fact, I think it's a requirement that they have to be an adherent to a particular religion.
That's absolutely right, Kent. And see, this is the quirk. That's the way the Howard government brought the program in. And look, I don't want to get too political about it, but the truth of the matter is that requirement is really an anomaly because the condition of hire doesn't match the job description.
Yeah.
And in fact, the ALP, when it was in government, kept the program, kept up the funding under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, but put in a change to the effect that if a school wanted to, it could opt to hire a non-religious person as a chaplain. Now, as it happened, 5 out of 6 schools kept hiring the religious chaplain.
Oh, there you go.
But the problem now is that the Abbott government put back in the requirement that all chaplains be religiously affiliated.
Right, okay.
Now, I say that's a problem, not in itself, but it does open up the program to legitimate legal attack, which would be a great shame.
Well, I mean, you have a law background. What would be the legal basis to challenge that?
The legal basis would be that the requirement that any chaplain be religiously affiliated is discriminatory under state and federal law because it's not a necessary qualification to do the job properly.
It's unrelated, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, we can argue the toss philosophically about whether it ought to be. I mean, my personal view is that chaplains should have more freedom to discuss matters religious. But the fact of the matter is that in the way the program was set up, it looks like window dressing. And I suspect was, to some extent, political window dressing to have this requirement. And the problem is it plays into the hands of the radical secularists because they have one good argument. I go through in the paper, most of their arguments are rubbish.
Yep.
And you can demolish them one by one. That argument is not. That argument is sound. And sooner or later there will be a test case on it. And the program will be attacked for all the wrong reasons. They're unnecessary. That's as much a political problem as anything else, and we might touch upon that later in the talk.
Okay. Well, I mean, right now it's looking, if we read the tea leaves correctly, it's looking pretty much like in May next year we'll have a federal election and we'll end up with a Labor government. I don't. Is that a surprising thing to say? Is that too big a call to make?
Well, no. I think I read yesterday the bookies have got Labor at $1.14, so they're very, very short-priced favourites, and frankly, it's hard to see any other result. Now, put aside the politics, people have different views about that. But from the point of view of the Australian religious community, people of all faiths for that matter, not just Christianity, in my opinion, the key to the future success and prosperity of programs like school chaplains and more widely questions of SRE and GRE, which
I want to talk about that.
Is to find some sort of way of connecting with the ALP on these issues and coming to some kind of sensible arrangement where both sides can respect the other's point of view. And it's not just a matter of us and them, because there are people within the federal ALP who are Christians. Of course there are. Yes, there's a vocal element that's hostile to Christianity, though I think that's more in the Greens than in the ALP. But as a political reality, that is what the churches have to do.
Okay.
There will be a Labor government from May 2019, and if it's a landslide result, it'll be there for 6 years at least.
Wow. And you let slip in your article that your unnamed sources basically indicate that Labor is quite likely to maintain the funding for the chaplaincy program.
Yes.
Possibly to tweak it back, as you said it was earlier.
That's right.
Under Rudd and Gillard, but apart from that, to maintain the program as it is.
That's right. And all sensible people can see that the program is popular and helps the battlers and the underdogs. It's a program that any political party would be very ill-advised to remove.
Yeah,
and
sure.
the Labor Party's not stupid. So they've given these indications, as I understand it, behind the scenes. But it's worrying that they didn't feel they could do it publicly, as though they're concerned about one aspect of their voting bloc, which is the aspect that, frankly, hates the churches and everything they stand for.
Yeah.
That's a concern. But I don't think that view is prevalent amongst the people that matter within the federal ALP.
Okay, all right. Look, I guess if you want, produce a battle royale, when it comes to the public square and politics, mix religion and our children,
yes,
and maybe throw a bit of sexual politics in there as well, and it's basically a recipe for disaster. And those are the sort of debates that we've been seeing happening over the last few years that have been very heated. The chaplaincy issue is one. The teaching scripture in schools is another, and then we have the more recent issue of questioning whether religious schools should have the right to employ teachers or have students in their school who are, I guess, somehow comply with the beliefs of the church that runs that school. I mean, it's a perfect storm, isn't it? Really,
it's a very potent and ugly mix. Now, we saw this raise its head during the Wentworth by-election. For all the wrong reasons, largely the wrong reasons. I was just rereading in the last few days the announcement made by the Anglican principals of Sydney a little while back, and in particular, if I may recommend it to your listeners, the letter sent out by the principal of St Andrew's School,
which is where?
In the city, right near Town Hall.
Okay, here in Sydney. Yeah.
In Sydney, yes, here in Sydney. Making some excellent points. Now, for a start, the issue that's got all the focus, namely the so-called right of religious schools to expel gay students or people who identify as gay, is a complete non-issue in the sense that schools don't do it. Religious schools simply don't do it and haven't done it, and it would be abhorrent to any right-thinking person. They don't want that right. They've said so publicly.
But they currently do have...
They currently have it. That's correct.
Have those exemptions. Do you know for how long those exemptions have been in place in the Anti-Discrimination Act?
Sex Discrimination Act of 1984. It was actually, ironically, strengthened by Labor. That is, the religious exemptions were strengthened by Labor.
And that's a federal law, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
There are also overlapping state and territory laws in the mix. It's a complicated situation.
Yeah.
And that's why I was so pleased that overnight, as we speak, the whole debate was being argued in the Senate and it's been pushed into committee. And I think that's appropriate. Now, it's not what the Labor Party wanted to do. They wanted to push through their amendment just to tackle this gay student issue, which everyone agrees about. But the focus is too narrow. This has to be a holistic approach. The Ruddock Review, and why on earth that hasn't been properly tabled to the general public by now. And
well, that's right. That's where this all started, didn't it? Because
exactly.
After the same-sex marriage plebiscite, I guess as a sort of a sop to the religious concerns out there, say, hey, look, we do care about religious freedom. We're hearing your concerns. Let's actually have a formal parliamentary committee, to look at this issue.
Great idea.
They have been looking at it.
Yeah, they've reported months and months ago.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Back to the Parliament, but haven't released the report.
Not properly, no. There's been leaks, there's been selective leaking and all sorts of propaganda, but from both sides. But what needs to happen here is look, as a matter of practical political reality, it has to be done slowly and methodically so that we actually get it right this time. We can't just take – this is the argument that the Anglican principles made. The current situation is clumsy, to use their word, in the extreme, because religious freedom is not protected. It's not protected directly and expressly as it ought to be. It's done sort of sneakily by way of exemptions to existing anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah, well, Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights. I mean, we do have built into our Constitution a sort of an echo of, the American First Amendment, don't we? That basically says, we shouldn't be passing laws that uphold a certain religion or forbid a certain religion. But apart from that general principle in our Constitution, there is no official right to there's no right to free speech, there's no right to freedom of association or anything. We don't have a Bill of Rights, but it's reflected in exemptions, you say.
It's reflected in exemptions, some of which, as the church schools point out, they don't even want. They're happy to remove. The key issue is not students. The key issue is the ability, the right of religious schools to hire and fire teachers, not on the basis of their sexuality, but on the basis that they will uphold the Christian or Muslim or whatever Buddhist principles of the school. And that is a key right. That is what has to be sorted out.
It's a much broader issue, though, isn't it?
Much broader, isn't it? Much broader issue.
I mean, I remember during the same-sex, in the lead-up to the same-sex marriage plebiscite, there was a particular retail outlet, I can't remember if it was a bakery or whatever it was, where one of the employees put up on her private Facebook page that she was encouraging people to vote no, or that she was going to vote no. Her employer found out about that and was outraged, upset, said that doesn't reflect, my values or the values of my business, and sacked her. And I remember that indeed.
I mean,
that starts to get tricky, and you think, well, wow, should you have the right to do that?
These are very tricky issues because your example, it cuts both ways.
It does.
For everyone who wants religious freedom, there'll be people with diametrically opposite views who want to utilise their freedom to hire and fire. So everyone just needs to take a bit of a chill pill here, and this process has to be done very carefully because these are fundamental human rights.
It's a real balancing act, isn't it?
It really is,
because
all human rights are.
Yeah, well, that's right, and that's something that's not often appreciated. There is a clash of rights. There's a place where they intersect and overlap, and you something's got to give. So on one hand, you have the idea that, look, surely an organisation should be able to run their operation according to their values, and I think most people agree with that. I mean, if I was a neo-Nazi and I turned up to my local Greens office, who was looking for an administrative assistant, and I far exceeded the qualifications. I was the best applicant by far. Surely that Greens branch office should have the right to say, you know what, you've got all the qualifications, but I just don't think you're right for our organisation. I don't think your beliefs and your commitments are really aligned with where we're at. And I don't think anyone would have a problem with that. But
no sensible person would. No,
well, that's right.
I agree with you.
But somehow when it comes to, hi, I'm a Wiccan pagan and I'd like to, be a teacher in your evangelical school, suddenly that becomes an issue. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty stark example, but it's not invalid. It's not invalid.
I'm using extreme examples to make the point.
And you're right to do so. And this point has been made in the debate in the last few months and indeed for years. But that is what's at stake. I just hope that, and can I say I really commend. I didn't know much about them until 24 hours ago, but the two so-called Centre Alliance senators were the ones who tip the balance on this.
Oh, these is the old Nick Xenophon.
I think that's
party
right.
Guys.
Yeah. They were the ones who cast the vital vote to defer it.
Oh, in the Senate.
To defer the discussion so that it can be done in a proper fashion.
They weren't happy take with a chill pill, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a most important discussion, and let's hope that people on all sides can sort of begin to recognise the view of the other.
There seems to be a basic disagreement on what the role of a teacher or a staff member in a school is. Is it simply to teach geography, or is it and that is the view of one, I guess, side of the debate, that look, you're here to teach geography. There's the curriculum. Are you a good teacher? Do you have good pedagogy techniques or whatever teachers do? Then the other side of the debate is saying, what, a teacher is actually a role model, and they role model the broader values of the school. And I remember a previous boss of mine here at Adventist Media noted that the hospital across the road from here used to have a gardener who you wouldn't think was a very important person, but the way he interacted with different people who came onto that campus was legendary, and now they've actually named a building after him, in his honour.
That was John Calvin's number one point, or one of them.
Yeah.
Anyone, whatever their position, however humble it may be, if they're doing it for the glory of God, can make a massive difference. Whether you're the gardener, the toilet cleaner, to use Tim Keller's example, you can either do a great job or you can do an ordinary or a terrible job. It's up to you. I mean, just coming back to the teachers, look, in the real world, your ability to teach geography competently is basically what schools, including religious schools, are looking for.
Yeah.
It's the stars who give the bit extra. What the religious schools, though, are worried about is they're not particularly worried about, they all employ plenty of people who are unbelievers, or not all schools, but
or
some,
from a different faith
some
tradition.
Schools, or from a different faith. But they would be concerned, and rightly, about people who sort of openly flouted or openly, expressly contradicted, either in word or deed, the ethos of the school. And as you said earlier, Kent, that's the same with any organisation. But in schools, it's particularly important because the independent schools point out, Protestant, Catholic, all faiths, the number one reason many parents send their children to these schools, and they're prepared to pay the fees, which in some cases they're outrageous, is because of that very thing. The ethos in which their children will be educated.
It has to be said, Roy, though, on the other hand, however, and I know this is something you've looked at in the past, there was a time when all church schools and Catholic parochial schools had to be completely self-funded. And
correct.
Yes. There was a big argument about, should the government support these at this, was it the state aid
debate?
The state aid debate.
For a century, from the 1860s to the 1960s.
It was a big deal. And now we accept it as a fait accompli that church schools, private schools, will accept some form of government funding. And often it's more federal rather than state. But nevertheless, they get government funding.
That's right.
So
which, by the way, can I just... I was discussing with a young woman at my church on Sunday, about 20 years of age, early 20s. She was astounded when I told her, you do realise that Protestant schools argued against funding for their own schools for 100 years.
Why did they do that?
Because they didn't want Catholic schools to get funding.
Oh, okay.
It was as simple as that. They thought it was more important to keep money away from Catholic schools than for their own schools to be supported.
I think that's called dog in the manger, isn't it?
And now, of course, all those sectarian divisions are thankfully almost a
fading,
complete thing of the past. And one is happy enough just to find a Christian of any denomination, let alone being so parochial about it.
So I guess at the time, Catholic schools were sort of code for poor Irish, and perhaps the fees would have to be lower in order for Catholic families to send their kids.
That's always been the case. Although it's also worth pointing out that Protestant school fees were much more moderate, and even at the elite sort of GPS type level, to use a Sydney example, than they are now. I mean, I think it's yet another scandal is way that the elite Protestant schools in particular have just become out of reach of almost everyone in the community. So I think that those low-fee independent schools were a terrific innovation.
I guess the point I was trying to make with bringing up that school funding is that surely once the government is giving schools funding, surely that money can't be with no strings attached. Surely it has to come with strings attached. And in some ways it seems to me a little bit disingenuous to say, on the one hand, yep, keep the funding coming, and why is it so low? We want more of your government funding. And on the other hand, say, stay out of our business, let us run our school according to our values. I mean,
put your finger on the other reason. The other reason Protestant schools didn't, the really principled Protestants in the 19th century didn't want government funding is because it would come with strings attached. And that
and it does. I mean, in terms of national curriculum, in terms of accreditation, in terms of a lot of things, we shouldn't be surprised in some ways.
Of course, I mean, and constitutionally, we know the federal government can make so-called tied grants to the states. You can only spend this money for these purposes, or direct funding. Either way, they can impose conditions, and it's taxpayers' money. They're elected to represent the taxpayer, so that's the other reason why state aid was such a
hot topic.
A hot topic, indeed,
yeah.
No accident. I think it's fascinating, Kent. I've made a bit of a study of those religion in schools debates from the 19th century, and the arguments are just exactly the same now.
Oh, really?
Yes, all the same arguments are being trotted out, except the one difference is this: with very, very few exceptions, 100 plus years ago, no one argued that religion was a bad thing in and of itself. The real problem was that so many people took religion so seriously that they had very, very strong views about which religion or which denomination of the Christian church.
Right.
There wasn't nearly to the extent there is now, just of a plague on all your houses sort of argument, which is the other element.
Okay.
The other element in it today.
All right. Now, look, just before we finish, because we are pretty much out of time, we wanted to look at special religious education, because this is a sort of a related issue. So we have public schools, state schools, where we have class time during the day set aside for volunteers or low-paid people to come in from the community to teach kids about usually Christianity, but sometimes other religions as well. Now, this is obviously another, bring our kids and religion, together, and you get a fairly hot debate. So where's this headed, do you think?
Well, there's another political football. I mean, the Victorian government a few years back scrapped SRE, or whatever the term was in Victoria.
Yeah, it's called SRE, SRI, RE, all sorts of things.
During school hours, that is. There have been pushes in that direction in New South Wales. There's a vigorous debate in Queensland, I understand. And just the other day, the New South Wales Secondary Schools Principal Association came out with an announcement that they advocated the scrapping of SRE in high schools.
Wow, scrapping. So not just moving it out of school hours, not just making it opt out or opt in or whatever. But
scrapping. They, in their words, it's a waste of time. It's an inconvenience, and there's more important things to learn about.
Goodness gracious. Is this along the same lines as those sort of arguments about, should we teach other languages? Should we teach music? There's one side I was saying, it's good for the brain, it's good for broad education and awareness, and other people are saying, no, we need to focus on, literacy and STEM and and this sort of stuff.
I think so. They're also advocating the scrapping of language teaching in secondary schools. So it's very much a vocational sort of approach to education. It's all about equipping people for the next stage, whether getting into your preferred course and getting into your preferred job and making money. A narrow view of education. Yeah, which personally I find dispiriting.
Do you think? I mean, honestly, like stepping back. I mean, you're a lawyer. You understand the legalities and how the law needs to be disinterested and apply the same principles across the board. Do you think it's really the right thing to do for one particular religion to be able to, I guess, teach their religion during class time in a government school, or is that privileging one religion above others in a way that's actually unfair?
No. Well, SRE, as I understand it, in theory at least, would allow followers of any religion, any of the main religions to go in. I mean, it just happens to be the case that in Australia, for historical reasons, we are a vast majority even today, Christian country.
Mm-hmm. At least nominally.
At least nominally, that's an important qualification. And it's voluntary.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's semi-voluntary because in a lot of places you actually have to, if you don't want your kids to go, you actually have to write the form in.
That's true.
To the school. So it's the default position is that your kids will end up going to religious education if you don't care enough to opt out.
That's true. But you can opt out.
Yeah.
And, I mean, in any event, I'd make this broader point that the people who argue that exposing young minds to sort of any religious idea whatsoever is dangerous and immoral.
Tantamount to child abuse.
Indeed. I just find it so sad. I went to state schools exclusively myself, and my biggest regret is that I was not exposed enough to religious instruction. I'm not even talking here about proselytising. I'm just talking about the other line in this debate, which is GRE, general religious.
Learning about all the religions of the world, all the different approaches, which is quite a different thing, yeah.
Quite a different thing.
Yeah. And I'd agree with you. I think that's important. How can you learn...
I actually think it's more important than SRE myself. I think the compulsory curriculum is the most important thing of all. Now, this would be a Herculean task.
Yeah.
Because we're heading in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah.
To get more religion rather than less onto the compulsory curriculum. And it's hard enough to just keep the 1 period a week SRE class. But my argument, I've made this in books, is that to give all Australian children a fair go, to make up their own minds on an informed basis once they're young adults.
And you say this in your article too, a similar
Indeed.
thing. Yeah.
They have to be taught the basics of religious faith.
And it's not an informed choice unless you're informed.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's in truth the system is slipping further and further towards a choice, but it's a choice by default of irreligion. And I just think that's terribly sad, because surely everyone can agree, wherever you are on the spectrum, that the truth or otherwise of the existence of God and the ways or way to God is the most important question of all. So the idea that should be off limits to inquiring minds is just, to me, repellent. And I believe that with good faith, goodwill on all sides, and that's a huge if in this day and age, a curriculum could be put together where fair-minded teachers could impart the basics to children. And I'm speaking here of both primary and secondary school. Obviously, tailor the content accordingly.
Age appropriate.
Yeah. Exactly. So that children, state school or independent school, it's easier in independent schools because schools have more flexibility, at least get the basic building blocks of information so they know the right questions to ask when they get more mature.
That's right, yeah.
That to me is the crux of it.
Well, there you go. Well, look, speaking of inquiring minds, I really hope we've had some inquiring minds listening to us today, because you've certainly given us a lot of food for thought, Roy Williams. Thanks so much for being with Signs of the Times Radio this week. My pleasure, Kent. Always a pleasure.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.